Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and today we're going to be talking about the best decks to play for ranked battles going into the second week of the A4B season. Even though we didn't get any new cards this month, the decks and the metagame is actually developing pretty rapidly. Things are changing every single day. We're going to cover the best decks here in this video, but before we do that, I got to tell you guys about the tournament series. That's right, the third tournament of our series is actually tomorrow at noon. Link to register down in the description below. We almost have 300 people already registered, and this week there are $200 in the prize pool, so definitely come out and play. It's going to be a really great event. It's going to be a really great time. I would highly recommend it. All right, let's get into the list of the best decks to play for ranked battles. And yes, we are going to start today by talking about Suicune. So I did make a post on the community tab on YouTube a couple of days ago, really describing my experience currently with ranked. I am trying to keep up with it a little bit more myself. I've been floating around top 500 in Master Ball tier. I don't play enough, I don't think, to breach top 100, and my win rate this season isn't anything that spectacular. But once I kind of hit that top 500 range, I was kind of forced to swap to Suicune. So this is an example of a Suicune deck from a tournament just yesterday where they are actually playing one copy of Guzma in place of one copy of Leaf that is typically seen in Suicune and Giratina. I think that the Guzma can be very useful. There's definitely a lot of applications. Off the top of my head, I think, the Rocky Helmets against Giratina Darkrai and against Guzzlord are definitely really important. And some of the lightning type decks with electrical cord, a Guzma can definitely win you a lot of games for sure. It can basically act as a red or, an extending amount of damage if your opponent is playing Giant Capes like in the mirror matchup. I like Guzma. I also feel like Leaf comes in clutch a lot just because Repel is such a useful card against Suicune in the early game to move you off your energy curve and force you to attach to a Pokemon that you don't really want to. Especially going first in early game, Repel can definitely feel pretty bad about Suicune if you're playing it. However, Guzma definitely still a good card. Everything else about the deck, I think, at this point is fairly standard. So, yeah, I was kind of forced to swap to Suicune. There's a lot of different developments happening in the ranked metagame right now, especially once you kind of get into that top 5,000 Master Ball range. We'll get into it later in this video. A lot of different lightning type decks have popped up this week. Of course, Raichu EX was released this week with the solo battles. Various different sort of Tapu, Koko, Pikachu, Oricorio decks are floating around in the metagame. And quite frankly, I feel like Suicune is kind of still the best option. Like, it's a little bit ironic. I've spoken about it over the last couple of videos, but the inclusion of all of these Oricorio decks really makes Suicune and Greninja even better for whatever the reason. Again, I think a lot of people are playing Oricorio potentially to counterplay this deck, but Greninja just kind of stops that from happening. Greninja is and always kind of will be one of the best counters to Oricorio. It can one-hit KO, and you can draw into Greninja pretty easily with Suicune. Giratina can act as a wall as well in the active spot, but Giant Cape, double Irida, even Oricorio hitting you for weakness, Suicune can kind of just sit there, tank damage, and then draw cards until you draw into Greninja, and then at that point, the game is kind of over if Greninja gets up and running. So yeah, a lot of these lightning type decks just really aren't as good into Suicune as you might think. There are some good options, but we're going to cover them in today's video. So if you would like to play those lightning type decks, there are a variety of different options for you. But yeah, Suicune Greninja definitely still the best deck in the entire game right now. And I think that the Giratina version is probably still the standard, like the gold standard right now of this current metagame. But what I found to be very interesting is a deck list that actually did extremely well, again, at the Frog EX tournament yesterday. And that is going to be something that we talk about in a few minutes later in this video. But before we do that, I actually want to tell you guys about the sponsor of today's video. That's right, we have a sponsor. Let's go check them out. So the sponsor of today's video is Tactor, a new mobile app that's going to help all of you guys become even better at Pokemon Pocket. It's got a lot of really great info, data, deck lists, and guides for all of those deck lists. Here is a quick rundown. As we see right here, we have deck guides for all of the best decks in Pokemon Pocket. We got Dragonite, Sylveon, Raikou EX, Guzzlord, Suicune, Greninja, all a bunch of really cool stuff. Now, if we go over to the win rates, we actually do have kind of like a tier list where it's ranking all of the best decks right now. As we see, these are all of the S tier decks. Really cool. If we go ahead and we click Suicune and Greninja, we can see down here, it's got all of the cards for the deck list, some basic breakdown. If we go into in-depth deck analysis, we see there's actually an overview of the deck list, how to play it. If we go down here, we even have some primary win conditions. It highlights our main attackers, our consistencies, and disadvantages for the deck list. A lot of really cool stuff. It even breaks down the game plan for you guys who are looking to learn new deck lists or, of course, find the best decks to play in Pokemon Pocket. We cover the metagame all the time here on the channel. Tactor makes a lot of sense. I thought it would be a really great tool for you guys definitely go and check it out. Like I said, over 30 active deck guides. So if you want to become better at Pokemon Pocket and if you want to stay more well-informed, definitely go check out Tactor. Thanks again for sponsoring this video. All right, so the next deck that we're going to talk about is actually Flareon and Jolteon. So this is definitely not like a flavor of the week type of deck. I think this is a deck that's going to stick around for quite some time. I've talked about it a bit last week. I really do feel like this deck is kind of just an improvement to the typical Turbo Flareon strategy that has been in the metagame for the last month or two. I think that Flareon is a very, very strong Pokemon. It traditionally does well into Giratina, Darkrai, and really a lot of the other like grass type decks that were floating around, like Buzzwole, like the Decidueye, and like Executor. I really like Flareon. Unfortunately, it's never had like an incredible win rate against Suicune, you know? Like, theoretically, it can beat Suicune pretty easily just because of the nature of Flareon and the fact that it can just hit for 150, 170 on turn 2 and kind of sweep through your opponent. It definitely has a lot of potential, but the inclusion of Jolteon and Pichu into the deck actually gives it not only still a valuable Pokemon in counterplay to Oricorio in the Oricorio decks, but it gives you an option to hit for Suicune for weakness, right? Yes, we're flipping coins with Pin Missile. This is Genetic Apex Jolteon, by the way. This Jolteon card is actually really good in this current metagame. I understand that like it's a bit of a gamble card and people might look at this and think that it's not that consistent, but you got to understand that even if Jolteon is only doing like 40, 80 damage, like with weakness, it actually is very significant against Suicune. And it allows us to attack on our second turn going first, which is something that Flareon has never actually been able to do with the 3 energy attack cost. And going second, it actually is even better. If we go Pichu into Jolteon, if we're going second, that is, we can actually still go into Flareon EX on our third turn. And that's actually kind of crazy. So I think that Jolteon gives this deck a lot more pace. It allows it to not only hit for weakness on Suicune, but it does also give you the ability to still get around Oricorio pretty easily with 2 copies of Jolteon. But like I said, allows you to kind of have an attacker more early in the game, which I think is definitely pretty valuable. I really like Jolteon. I do think that it's made this deck better, especially for tournament play. The high RNG nature of this deck specifically being a bit of a high roll deck list. You know, you can flip 4 coins and flip 4 heads to do 160 with Jolteon and just KO Pokemon. That can win you the game. Or of course, you can just get Flareon out. So this is definitely like a bit of a high roller deck, but it's very fast paced and it's a lot more consistent than you might think. With the 5 evolutions, the 4 EVs in the deck list, Sylveon allows us to draw cards. Again, Jolteon is always a strong option. It kind of forces your opponent to go through a couple single prize Pokemon more often than they would if you weren't playing Jolteon, right? And then you have Flareon for the late game. I really like this deck. I think it has a ton of potential to potentially be, I would say, like the second or third best deck in the game right now. Jolteon massively increasing our win rate into Suicune. I think that Flareon and Jolteon is kind of a match made in heaven. Honestly, one of my favorite decks in the entire game right now. Not something that I particularly play in ranked battles just because my luck with coin flips is tremendously awful, personally, but for tournaments, I think it's really good. And honestly, for ranked battles as well, I think that this could be a totally fine option for you if you wanted to play a bit of a Gamba deck. You could definitely go on some massive streaks and really beat almost any deck in the entire game. I would say maybe the only things that you might struggle with are Guzzlord, just because of the nature of Guzzlord. But Flareon and Jolteon can actually both one-hit KO Guzzlord if you get a little bit lucky. So I really do like the deck list. I think that this is honestly probably one of my top options right now in the current metagame, which is cool because it's a late development deck. This is a deck that popped up just last week. And again, no new cards this format. So for new decks to pop up and, old decks like the traditional Flareon deck to be, developed further and to be evolved, that is really cool. And I think it's a good sign for the health of the metagame. I would definitely still suggest this deck, one of my favorites in the entire metagame right now. But if we talk about a deck list that recently kind of did well at a tournament, I kind of wanted to put this as the weekly wildcard this week, but I actually feel like this is a pretty well-established archetype, so we're going to just cover it here, and there's a different deck for the weekly wildcard. This is going to be Suicune Greninja, but with just Oricorio, so it's kind of a mix between like Ori Ninja, except instead of Giratina, we're playing Suicune, but it's also Suicune Greninja, except we're not playing Giratina, we're playing Oricorio. So it's a kind of a strategy that's been around for a while. Like we've seen 1 copy of Oricorio and 1 copy of Giratina paired with Suicune and Greninja pretty often. What's interesting about this deck is that you actually do have 2 pretty decent qualifying options in terms of the energies that you want to run. That's probably going to be people's main question with this deck list. Now, I'm not actually sure exactly what the players of the tournament playing this deck, by the way. This deck went 6-0 at the Frog EX tournament yesterday, which is really cool. So I'm hoping to see it maybe do well in day 2 of Frog EX today. but a really interesting deck list. And again, it's Oricorio and it's Suicune and it's Greninja, so it's kind of a combo that we've seen before. What I do like about this deck is that you can just play it like Suicune Greninja and you can still win matchups a bunch, right? We don't have that Giratina, which is definitely going to offset some of the disadvantages of going first with the deck list, but Oricorio itself can be also a bit of a stall option, card that I think is going to be really useful for sure in like Giratina Darkrai and in Guzzlord, which are two matchups that Suicune doesn't always win against, right? Those are definitely some of the tougher matchups for Suicune and Greninja. Back to the energy thing with this deck, which is always interesting, is like you could play only water energies and just not use Oricorio as an attacking option and then have Suicune less often available to attack, or you could play water and lightning energies, use Oricorio more as an attacking option, but use Suicune less as an attacking option and kind of more as you know, just like a draw engine or like a tank in the active spot. The Oricorios plus Irida kind of means that either way, whether or not we're playing water and lightning energies, we're able to effectively auto win the Giratina matchup. And that's kind of what the strength of Ori Ninja was back in the day, right? When we were playing it not with Suicune and we were playing it with Giratina, it kind of just auto won the Giratina matchup because the combo of Greninja and Oricorio and that damage plus the healing from Irida just resulted in a deck that was unable to kind of lose against Giratina Darkrai. I think traditionally it's got like an 85% win rate into Giratina Darkrai, which is pretty cool. The Oricorio can be pretty clutch against Suicune, right? In the opportunities where they just brick or maybe they don't get Greninja online, which doesn't happen all of the time, Oricorio can be a very valuable Pokemon to buy you time. But yeah, I think that this deck list has two really strong Pokemon in the active spot at all times, whether it's Oricorio or Suicune. And again, I'm not even exactly sure what the player playing this deck was running in terms of their energy types, because I kind of look at this both ways. You could kind of play it however you want. And effectively, in some tournaments, you're not actually required to submit the energy types for your deck list. So it's very possible that that player flip-flopped in terms of which energy they ran, depending on their matchup, right? Which I find to be definitely valuable, but also kind of cheating, which is why in our tournaments, we require people to submit their energy types. But a deck list like this theoretically can kind of flex which energy types it runs. And I think that that is actually kind of cool, but also probably cheating at the same time. It's all good. I'm not hating on anybody. I'm just saying it's one of those unique decks that theoretically could change it up depending on the matchup, right? So I like it. I think it's a really cool deck. I'm not surprised that it did really well at a tournament recently. I think it went, or the number one player went like 3-0 into traditional Suicune Greninja deck. So I just wanted to mention it. It's just sort of a unique aspect here. Again, I can't speak exactly as to like how to pilot the deck or what energy types they're running, because again, I don't really know. I've never really played this deck, but it did do well recently. And in general, I think that you know, Oricorio has seen a lot of play with Suicune and Greninja, so I just wanted to mention this deck because it did well recently at a tournament. Two players, I think actually, one was like 5-1, one was 6-0. So combined, they were 11-1 in day one playing this deck list, and I think it definitely performed pretty well for them. And I think that's definitely pretty cool. So it's kind of a flex deck, right? You can kind of do both different things. You can kind of rely on Oricorio for the Giratina Darkrai matchup, or you can just sort of, you know, play Suicune Greninja and then win games that way, right? So definitely interesting. This might be kind of the development later this month, later this season for Suicune and Greninja. Maybe Giratina kind of gets phased out, who knows? But either way, definitely an interesting deck nonetheless. One copy of X-Speed, probably here just because if we do lead Froakie or we lead Oricorio, we can get into Suicune to start drawing cards. That's always the primary motive of Suicune decks, is to kind of get Suicune in the active and just draw through your deck to get your board state set up. Honestly, I kind of like it. I really do. Anyway, I wanted to showcase it here in this video. Next up is Guzzlord. Yeah, we got to talk about our man Guzzlord. In tournaments, he's been struggling, but I actually think Guzzlord is still a valuable ranked battles deck list. Again, a bit of a Gamba deck. We're flipping coins, but we are playing one copy of Will, so theoretically speaking, we can do that. This copy, or this version of Guzzlord that I chose to showcase today, again, the highest placing Guzzlord from the Flareon EX tournament just yesterday. I like to include sort of more modern versions of decks, you know what I mean? That way, we kind of showcase different, you know, different lists, you know what I mean? This deck is playing one copy of Will, one copy of Lusamine, which to me, like, is a little bit sketchy. The one copy of Red, the Repel, the red card, like the Mars, double healing, double Pokemon Center Lady and Potion is interesting. Cyrus as well. So this is a bit of a kind of a flex Guzzlord list. It's playing a little bit of everything, which I find to be pretty cool. But yeah, the one Lusamine, the one Will is a little bit sketchy. You are definitely reliant on, you know, that first Guzzlord being pretty valuable and doing its job, because if you get Mars to 1 after you take a KO and then your Guzzlord gets KO'd, you're probably going to be in a pretty tough spot, right? The Lusamine is definitely a very important card late in the game when you're playing Guzzlord, especially into like Suicune and Greninja. So I like the list. I definitely do. I think that the healing cards here with the Rocky Helmets probably do help you result in being maybe a little bit better against the Oricorio decks, which is definitely becoming a bit more common for sure. And in general, I would say that Guzzlord's still a strong option for ranked, honestly. When I'm playing Suicune myself, like, Guzzlord is probably the one matchup that I really don't want to hit. I would rather hit Giratina Darkrai, I'd rather hit the Mirror matchup, I'd rather hit the Lightning type decks, honestly. Guzzlord, to me, still feels like, even maybe not from a win rate perspective, but just from an overall feel perspective, the one deck list that if I am playing Suicune and Greninja, I don't really want to run into. So, yeah, Guzzlord's been struggling pretty heavily in tournaments. I just think that the inclusions of a lot of Oricorio and Lightning type decks has kind of turned Guzzlord off a little bit from a win rate perspective, but I think in ranked battles, it's still going to be valuable. And like I said, we can always use Celesteela, right, to KO an Oricorio, and the Rocky helmets for sure. So if they're not playing Guzma, that is definitely a pretty valuable option there. Anyway, it's Guzzlord. It's been around for quite some time. I think it's still a very decent option. So here's one example of Guzzlord recently. Next up is Charizard. Yeah, we're going to talk about Charizard. It's still around. I got second place at our tournament last weekend. I am actually very curious to see how it performs this coming weekend, tomorrow, in our in our third tournament. But yeah, Charizard I think is still a good option, right? I think that it's tremendously good into basically most things in the metagame right now, aside from maybe Oricorio specific deck lists. But when I played this deck and I tested it myself, I actually found that the Oricorio matchup was quite winnable. We are playing 2 copies of Repel, and we have the Charmeleon, which can 2-hit KO Oricorio, right? So in a perfect world, we can use Charmeleon to KO one Oricorio, and if we're able to do that, then Charizard itself can effectively just kind of finish the rest of the game with double Repel and double Lily, right? So I like this deck. Again, it's going to be good into Suicune, it's good into Giratina Darkrai. It's probably also good into Flareon, just because Flareon can't 1-hit KO you, which is pretty cool. Theoretically, it can. He could flip 4 coins with Jolteon and use red and do 180, but, that's definitely a bit lucky of a draw there if that ends up happening. I think Charizard is actually a good deck list. There's a bunch of different ways to play Charizard. I've seen some people, I think like Saigon, who the #1 ranked player, was playing just traditional Charizard Sylveon at the #1 placement in ranked. Again, we'll talk about that later in this video, but I think that a lot of people see the decks that the #1 ranked player on ranked mode is playing, and then they copy those decks. But I'll talk about it in a bit, why I maybe don't think that's probably the smartest decision for you as a player that, unless you are also in like the top 10 of ranked. It's just a different world. It's a different metagame. We'll talk about it in a little bit. But yeah, I still like Charizard. I think that it's kind of pushed himself into the metagame. It's still a valuable option, and I think especially in tournaments, it could pop off and win at any point in time. But in ranked battles, it's a deck list that, again, doesn't really require a ton of thought, right? Whether we're playing Suicune or Giratina Darkrai or whatever it is, we are kind of just doing the same thing. Charizard just wants to get set up, it wants to stoke, and it wants to sweep through its opponent. Definitely can do that pretty effectively. I would say the only games where you really have to buckle down and understand what's going on is against the Oricorio decks, which, are still a bit common. It's hard to say in like Ultra Ball or in low Master Ball if a lot of people are playing Oricorio, but in that sort of top 1,000, top 500 range, I definitely do see quite a bit of, Lightning type Zero Aura kind of Oricorio decks, which is kind of where Charizard will struggle a little bit. But again, it is possible to win that matchup with Charmeleon with double Repel, and I think that's kind of fun. So anyway, there's Charizard. I still like it. I would still recommend it for sure. Next up is actually going to be the Daycare deck. Yeah, so I think that this is a deck list similar to Flareon that can kind of always get it done sometimes, no matter what you're kind of playing up against, right? This is, again, it's really just a high roll deck. This is the evolution of, the standard sort of Dark Arceus high roll deck. Now playing just an enormous amount of Pokemon. I think we're playing like, what is this, 13, 15 Pokemon? I don't even know. 13 Pokemon. Just an incredible amount of things that this deck can do. The Tyrogues are the inclusion here to beat Oricorio, so I believe that's sort of why Tyrogue was added. Tyrogue plus Darkrai is able to kind of effectively just stomp an Oricorio, especially in the early game, if you can get into it. Excuse me. We're playing 5 copies of all of the, energy accelerating baby Pokemon, so it's fairly likely that we lead off with those guys. We're not playing Leaf in this deck, so if you do lead Arceus or Darkrai or Snorlax, you're probably not going to have a great time, but that's why this is a high roll deck, because if you do lead a baby Pokemon and you get any of those Pokemon on your bench, it's pretty likely that you're going to be able to just pop off and start kind of sweeping through your opponent. The 2 Giovannis, the 1 red, it adds up to be pretty relevant. All of the damage that you can do makes a ton of sense, and in general, I think that this deck is actually not a bad climbing option, right? If you're going to play hundreds of games of ranked battles, why not play a deck that doesn't require a ton of thought? It just sort of, you just kind of queue up and then you just see what happens, right? The cards get drawn and you see what you can do. Some games you're just not going to be able to win, but some games you're not going to be able to lose, right? It's kind of similar to Flareon in that sense. That's why we call these like turbo decks, like these real true high roll decks. Arceus and Darkrai, again, have seen play before, but I think that the Snorlax is a great inclusion specifically for Giratina and Darkrai, just because Snorlax has so much HP. It can oftentimes one-hit KO a Darkrai or a Giratina, because again, we oftentimes do have Giovanni and Red in our hand. And in general, it just ends up being a really valuable card for that particular matchup. And then the Darkrai and Arceus are just good for basically anything else as well, right? So yeah, it's a fun deck. It really is. It's done well fairly recently at a couple online tournaments. I've actually played it twice. On stream, I hit this deck twice, playing Suicune on ranked, and they went first, led baby, got Snorlax, turned one bench, and they drew into Giovanni and Red both games. Like, so they just kind of, and they also broke out of sleep both games, which was a bit unfortunate. Snorlax also kind of counters Greninja a little bit in the sense that if Snorlax is in the active spot, it heals that 20 damage every turn, right? So as long as you can get Snorlax in the active fairly early, it's pretty likely that you're going to be able to kind of sweep through Suicune and Greninja, as long as like you lead a baby Pokemon and you get Snorlax on your bench turn one, right? That is kind of the win requirement when you're playing against Suicune, but definitely an interesting deck. Something that I actually have a lot of respect for currently in the metagame. A true kind of high roll deck like this, it doesn't really depend on, particular matchups. It kind of just hits whatever, and hopefully you draw the cards you need to win that matchup. So I actually have a bit of respect for the day. We call this the Daycare deck, because it's just playing a bunch of baby Pokemon, you know what I mean? It's really fun. I actually do like this. I would recommend it to anybody that is maybe looking to just kind of grind ranked a little bit more casually. Decks like that are actually a lot better options than you might think, right? I put Suicune at the front of this video because Suicune to me is the best deck, but it's also very involved, right? Especially the mirror matchup. If you're going to play Suicune in ranked, you got to understand how to play the deck, and you have to be pretty proficient, specifically in the mirror matchup. Whereas if you're playing things like Flareon and you're playing things like Snorlax and Charizard, you don't have to really think that much, or as much as maybe you would playing some of the other decks. They kind of just do their thing, and you can kind of, just let the cards roll, and maybe you win, maybe you lose. If you're anywhere close to 50% with win streaks, you'll climb eventually, right? So this is definitely a smart choice. Any of the high roll turbo decks with baby Pokemon, or just with Charizard, are actually good, decks to play if you're just looking to get to Master Ball, but maybe not looking to climb super high in Master Ball, right? But anyway, definitely a strong deck list. I'm curious to see how it does in this weekend's tournament as well. Next up is Giratina Darkrai. Yeah, I mean, so I actually went on like a 12-game losing streak a couple of days ago with Giratina Darkrai. I did play it for a few days in ranked, specifically because I really did actually just like playing it in the current metagame, but I did find eventually that everybody started to play Oricorio with Pikachu EX, which, I think maybe they were playing that deck because of Suicune was seeing a lot of play, but that deck list specifically is actually just really good into Giratina Darkrai. So for a few days, I actually think Darktina got completely pushed out of the ranked metagame, at least for like higher up Master Ball tier. But I think that if you're in Ultra Ball 4 or if you're unranked in Master Ball, Giratina Darkrai is still a very strong option. It's still something that I would pretty heavily recommend. Definitely still one of the best decks. It's also on the decline in terms of its tournament results. But again, I just think that a lot of decks are playing Oricorio. Suicune started to play Oricorio. The Pikachu EX Oricorio decks kind of started to pop up. Those are all things that Giratina Darkrai doesn't really love to run into. But it's such a consistent deck that even if it's a bad matchup, you always still have the ability to win games. And again, a very consistent deck. So I had to still recommend it this week. Again, it's probably best if you're not like really high up in Master Ball tier, but still a quality option. And I have nothing else to say. I would still recommend that you play Giratina Darkrai. Its positioning has really flip-flopped around a bunch. Like, it is kind of interesting. I think Giratina Darkrai has been the most counterplay deck this season, for whatever the reason. But again, I also think that there's a lot of available counterplay to Giratina Darkrai. In fact, basically every deck that we talked about in this video is going to be strong into Giratina Darkrai. So, keep that in mind. Like, and when I say strong, I mean theoretically, they don't lose to Giratina Darkrai, right, on average. So, be a bit hesitant for sure, depending on your ranked, but I still think Giratina Darkrai is a valuable deck for sure. Not a bad deck whatsoever. Next up, we are going to be talking about that Oricorio Pikachu deck, because this to me, I think is, or was at least at some point last week, the most common deck of ranked, and I still think it's a really, really good deck list. So again, against Giratina Darkrai, your matchup is significantly improved. All you have to do is get Oricorios on the board and then start attaching to Pikachu, and eventually all you have to do is take one KO with Oricorio, and as long as you can do that, or one KO with any Pokemon, and as long as your Pikachu has energy on the bench, you're just going to KO whatever comes in after you, right? So that's the strength of Pikachu. It's kind of like that checkmate button, specifically against Giratina Darkrai. Now, against Suicune, and again, this is very important to mention, I don't think this deck is like a hard counterplay to Suicune. Now, it might be close to like 50-50, but this is not a deck list that is specifically here to counter Suicune and Greninja. The Oricorios, the Zero Auras, they just don't do enough into Suicune with Greninja, all of the draw power, the double Irida. The Suicune's just going to park at the active spot, draw a bunch of cards, and then it's going to draw into Greninja, and it's just going to sweep through your Oricorio and your Zero Aura pretty easily. And it's very difficult to kind of get all of those Pokemon up and running while also getting Pikachu set up. So in the scenario that you do lead Tapu Koko going second, you will have an advantage. But if you lead Pikachu, you're kind of a sitting duck. And if they draw Greninja early, you're probably going to lose the game anyway. So it is a really interesting deck list. And I think it's a quality deck. Again, going to be really good into Giratina Darkrai. It's probably going to be decent as well into, again, a lot of the other decks like Charizard and, Guzzlord is like another one, right? All of the stuff that Oricorio traditionally is good in. This is probably the best way to play Oricorio. I would not be playing Oricorio right now with like Arceus, although Arceus is actually still pretty good, but the Pichu's a liability. That's why I'm not including it in this video. Suicune's still pretty rampant in the metagame. If you're playing Oricorio, I would play it with this deck. I really would. I think that this is probably the best kind of like pure, Oricorio type deck. But again, if we're trying to beat Suicune, I don't think Oricorio is the answer. I just don't think Oricorio is a good Pokemon in this weekend. I really don't. You're only hitting for 70 damage with weakness, and with the double Irida with the giant cape, they're just going to stay in the active, especially if you go first. They're going to be in the active spot for like 4 or 5, maybe 6 turns, and then at that point, they're fully set up, and they're just going to start sweeping you with their Greninjas and their Cyruses and stuff. It just doesn't work out in the way that you want. However, there is definitely still counterplay to Suicune. We're actually going to talk about that in the wild card for the week, which I actually think is a relatively new deck that is doing really well into Suicune, and I think is a very promising deck. So we'll talk about the wild card here after this. But yeah, this deck is exceedingly popular. Again, I believe that Saigon posted this deck and probably was using it to counterplay specific things at the top of ranked. And again, this is where I'm going to get into this one little tangent here. And again, I mean absolutely no disrespect to anybody, or of course to Saigon. He is probably, if not the best player in Pokemon Pocket. It's just a different world, right? Like the metagame that the #1 ranked player in ranked is living in is just a different world than the rest of us, or most of us rather. If you're an Ultra Ball 4, or if you're unranked Master Ball, or even top 10,000, top 5,000 in Master Ball, the decks that Saigon are playing probably aren't going to apply or like be that useful to you in your position in rank, just because the variety of decks that you're playing is going to be very different than the decks that, Saigon's playing as the #1 ranked player, right? When you're the #1 ranked player, you're getting queued up against the other top ranked players, and there becomes a very condensed metagame between all of the highest ranked players, and he's probably playing specific decks to counterplay specific other players in the decks that he's playing up against, right? How often do you queue against the same player twice, right? The higher rank you are, the more oftentimes that's going to happen. And I would imagine that happens all of the time for Saigon, the #1 ranked player, who of course is extremely good at the game and builds very, very good deck lists for his particular matchups. I would just say that it probably doesn't translate as accurately as you might hope, right? So just keep that in mind. There's a bunch of stuff that he plays that's very interesting, but probably would not work very well for you if you're unranked, like top 10,000 in Master Ball, right? I saw him playing like 18 trainer Tapu Koko, which again, probably not the smartest move. Oricorio is everywhere, but again, for him, that might be like the perfect matchup if his opponents are playing Suicunes, right? So it's just a different world. I don't mean any disrespect to any of you guys that are doing that, or Saigon himself. It's just I want to recommend what's best for you guys. It's hard to translate where he is in the metagame. Again, just in a very different position as the #1 ranked player. It's just a different world up there. So I just wanted to let you guys know that. But I would definitely still recommend some of his decks. It's not like all of his decks are useless, but it's not always, it doesn't always make sense, right? So that's where I would recommend not just sort of copying somebody's deck and then playing it, unless of course you are also, like a top ranked player. But anyway, that's a tangent. I do think this is probably one of the best Oricorio decks, if not the best Oricorio deck right now. I would definitely still recommend it. I think that a lot of people, if like you're seeing a lot of Giratina Darkrai or Suicune or Guzzlord or whatever it is on the ranked ladder, this is probably still going to be one of the better options. However, the wild card for the week is going to be a more specific counter meta deck to Suicune, and let's go ahead and talk about that next. So this is the wild card for the week. This is actually going to be Raichu. Now, we did cover a Raichu deck a couple of days ago, but again, I think that people develop the deck lists, things change a little bit as time goes on. This Raichu deck went undefeated against Suicune at the Frog EX tournament yesterday, and I believe it was like this player was 5-1. So I don't have the players' names, and I apologize, I forget. But this deck list I saw do really well again in the tournament against Suicune, and I thought, yeah, this is pretty cool. I do like it. So 2 copies of Pikachu, 2 Zeraora, 2 Raikou EX, 2 Elemental Switch. So the whole idea here is that instead of playing baby Pokemon, which again is definitely a pretty big liability into Suicune, and instead of playing Oricorio, a pretty big liability into Suicune, we're just playing cards that are specifically strong into Suicune itself and into Greninja, which is, you know, Raikou EX, Zeraora EX, and then of course Alolan Raichu and Raichu EX, both valuable options in their given scenarios. We're only playing 2 copies of these evolution Pokemon, but you know, you theoretically could just play, you know, 3 copies of them, or you could play double Alolan Raichu or double non-Alolan Raichu. They're both good for separate reasons. There are a lot of opportunities where Alolan Raichu is better. I would say against like Giratina specifically, Alolan Raichu is going to be better. Basically, any Pokemon that has, you know, 3 or more energies attached, Alolan Raichu is better. But if they have 2 or less energies, Raichu EX is better. So I think that Raichu EX, the non-Alolan version, is actually a more consistent option in terms of KOing Suicune, which I do think is probably somewhat valuable. The cool thing about this deck is that the 2 copies of Cyrus actually work really well here, because the Spark Pikachu actually does 10 damage to your opponent's bench Pokemon. That is pretty valuable to bring a Pokemon later up with Cyrus. And then Raikou as well with Voltaic Bullet also does bench damage. So a really, really cool deck list here. Going second, Raikou is going to be really good. Going first, Zeraora is going to be good. Pikachu, not a bad option either way with Zeraora and Elemental Switch. I actually really do love this deck, and I think that every Pokemon here has a valuable, I guess, placement or, you know, opportunity to do well into Suicune. So as far as like a Suicune counter deck goes, this is kind of my wild card for the week, and I do actually really like it as a specific Suicune counterplay option. Now, Raikou and Raichu EX and Zeraora, these are cards that necessarily aren't that strong into some of the other matchups, right? So you got to keep that in mind. Against things like Giratina Darkrai, against like Flareon or Guzzlord, not playing Oricorio is going to make your deck feel like a little bit worse in those matchups. But if you want to beat Suicune specifically, this is kind of the way you have to go. And it really is kind of an awkward position for some of the lightning type decks right now. You're either kind of hedging your bets and being, you know, a deck that does, you know, has Oricorio and can be good against like the other decks, or you're just not playing Oricorio at all and you're more better against Suicune but not the other decks. You know what I mean? So it's the lightning type stuff is really like at an in between. You know what I mean? Relatively speaking, a lot of the cards are kind of just weak into other things that aren't water and not Suicune. So you kind of want to play Oricorio, but then again, Oricorio is a bit of a liability, right? With Greninja's, you know, flying out and coming out all the time. So it's a little bit weird, right? It's a little bit strange. I would say that this is probably right here the best like overall lightning type deck. But if you wanted to be something that was specifically just really good into Suicune, this would be actually kind of my updated kind of Raikou list at the moment. Not mine, but like my recommendation as to what I would play if I wanted to play Raikou and specifically have a really good matchup into Suicune, which is why it's my wild card for the week. It is. I think it's definitely a really, really cool deck. Raikou EX is also just fun. I really like Raikou. It still has the legendary pulse ability. So like leading off with Raikou is a pretty big advantage just because you're drawing through so many cards. So the extra draw power with Raikou is going to further increase our ability to then draw into Raichu. We do have Electrical Cord as well. Even though the Suicune list we just mentioned at the beginning of the video was playing Guzma, I still think Electrical Cord is an absolutely broken Pokemon. And as long as your opponent doesn't hit you with Guzma, it is a very, very valuable card. Basically a win condition in a lot of scenarios. So, you know, there is that to keep in mind. Like a deck list like this in the Koko deck that I was playing last season did just kind of lose to Guzma, unfortunately, in a lot of scenarios. But no, I also think this deck is really good. One of my favorite decks that I've seen over the past week. So there you go, guys. There are the best decks for ranked mode. Let me know what you guys think. I think that the metagame's changed around a lot. I think that the lightning type decks are developing pretty rapidly. I think Suicune is still pretty dominant. And everything else is kind of in question right now. Again, Charizard did get second place at our tournament. The Jolteon Flareon deck popped up recently, has been doing well in ranked mode and in tournaments. I'm really excited to see how those decks perform in our tournament this weekend, or if maybe something like a lightning type deck can pop off and actually win. Last weekend, Suicune did get the win. It got lucky in the finals. I say lucky, but the Charizard player kind of bricked. Yeah, in general, Charizard went 7-0 into the finals and then ended up losing to Suicune, which is tough. But anyway, actually really fun. I think the metagame is actually quite fun. I really do enjoy grinding ranked right now. I think there's a lot of different viable deck lists. There's a lot of different unique strategies and interactions right now. And the variety is good. You know, people are going to look at this metagame and think, it's still Suicune. But like, you know, 80% of the meta is not Suicune. And there's a lot of variety in that 80%. And I actually have a lot of fun with it. And I think it's definitely pretty interesting. It's a good time. I would recommend it. Now, you know, I think we are still kind of in the old B1 waiting room. We're waiting for Megas. Maybe some people are waiting for Legends ZA to come out. Of course, I'll be playing that as well. In general, you know, I think Pokemon Pocket's still in a bit of a slow period, but I would still recommend that you participate in ranked battles because it is a lot of fun. And if you don't necessarily want to play ranked, you have our tournament series on the weekends. Definitely go and register for the tournament series. It's a really, really fun time. Again, you can you can win like real money and actually make a little bit of a profit from it. And the tournament experience is actually a lot more fun than you might think. Definitely go check it out. It's best of 3, which is different than ranked. So pretty cool, pretty fun stuff. But anyway, that's my list this week. Comment down below what you guys think. How's your experience for ranked battles been? What rank are you? Let me know what's been working out for you. And there's a bunch of decks that we didn't mention in today's video. That doesn't mean they're not good. It just means that I just wanted to highlight some other stuff, I think, this week that is specifically, you know, a little bit better. Anyway, that's the video, guys. Let's get out of here. Peace out. Have a good one. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks again to Tactor for sponsoring today's video. And yeah. That's it. All right, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later.